Is Monday the most hated day of the week?
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia. And you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_Beeble and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. The NBA is almost here. We are 2 days away from the season beginning, so we are switching into regular season mode. If you haven't had your drafts yet, there's tons of preseason content. Go and check out all of the previous shows I've done for the last 2-3 months, pretty much, just getting you ready for draft season. If you have had your draft, now it's time to switch into regular season mode, streaming, waiver wires, trades, all that sort of stuff. Although I do tend to hold off on trades unless it's an absolute no-brainer, until at least we see some action, because that's when the value really starts to open up. So today's podcast, we're going to be looking at week 1, a 6-day week because the season starts on a Tuesday, so not the full 7 days. Working out how best to maximize your team for this upcoming week, situations that we need to be aware of to have a successful start to the year in fantasy basketball. Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. Now, one thing I do want to mention before we get too far into this is that when we're looking at week 1, I often will look at this week and think that there is a real chance that I'm going to lose this week in a head-to-head matchup. And that's because variance strikes pretty hard early on in the season. Now, you do have to be active on the waiver wire because you have to be able to read what's going on. What moves have coaches made that you didn't anticipate? Which rotation decisions, which playing time decisions have happened and look like they will stick? Making those moves is key, and you've got to be getting those guys off the wire early on that come out of the gate and surprise. But on the flip side of that, panicking over someone who comes out and shoots 1 of 9 for 3 points in 27 minutes and go, oh man, he's shit, he only scored 3 points, I've got to drop him. That's where people make mistakes. Someone who blows up and goes for 35 and they shoot 9 of 4 or 9 of 13 and go to the line 10 times and hit all 10 of them. And you go, oh man, look at that. He's definitely a top 40 player. See, I knew it. And then the regression really hits. Being able to judge those things for being 1 off or 2 off outlier type performances rather than, hey, shit, look at the role this guy's got. This is going to stick. This is where more value is. So being able to differentiate between those two things is where the real success comes in these first couple of weeks in fantasy basketball. If someone starts out poorly, I'm happy to sit on them for a week, 2 weeks, take a couple of losses if necessary, just to wait for that to normalize, for it to come back, for the minutes to jump back up. If a coach makes a dumb decision, shout out to you, David Fizdale, shout out to any other coach apart from David Fizdale, because if they make dumb decisions, normally they rectify it and they'll fix it up in the time to come. So if you see a weird rotation where a clearly better player is being marginalized and the other rotation isn't working, I hold that guy. And then I wait to see what happens. And then if the coach still is stubborn, Fizdale-esque, and doesn't make the right move, then I move on. But if something doesn't make sense, it's not working for the team, the player is in a really small role for no apparent reason, then I will stick with that guy, I will hold on, and then I will see what happens after a couple of weeks. But it's about, there's no hard and fast rule. People always say, how long do you wait on this guy? How long do you wait? When should I make these moves? It is all very situation dependent. It's who's the guy you're grabbing? Who's the guy you're dropping? How have things looked? What's happened in these games? That's why I give comments on all of these games in my box score comments over on Basketball Monster when I do the regular season shows, talk about these games, trying to figure out which things are real, which things aren't, where to panic, where not to panic, what moves to try and make in those situations so you don't make them. And I always use this as an example. I know people get sick of it, but I remember 2 years ago, Jaylen Brown, first game of the season against the Cavs, came out and had like 25 points and people were unbelievably turgid thinking about it. And I got multiple people telling me that they would trade Bradley Beal to get Jaylen Brown back. Someone actually did it in their league. And of course, that worked out horribly because Brown was like the 160th best player and Beal was a top 25 guy. And those sort of overreactions based on that one performance because it was a young guy that we got super hyped about with stuff that just isn't going to stick. It is important to be able to differentiate where you're sitting in terms of what's real, what's not, what's replicable, what can happen in the future. So you'll see a lot of panic things happening in these first couple of weeks, and it is important to pay attention. So while streaming is really important in fantasy basketball, and if you don't know what streaming is, it's where you take your last roster spot, your last 2 roster spots, depending on how your league's set up. Do you have games limits? Do you have acquisition limits? But you use that as a rotating spot. You add a guy in for one day because he's got a good opponent, because there's a low amount of games on that day, because you need his particular numbers, and you stream that in. So instead of getting 3 games out of one roster spot, you get 6. You get 7 games out of that spot. Bulk games, boost up your counting stats to be able to beat your opponent in those numbers. But again, if you're using multiple streaming spots in week 1, you possibly are dropping someone who's going to have a lot of value later on. So I would rather forego heavy, aggressive streaming in week 1 just to sit on those guys that might be going through a bit of a slow start. I'll often sacrifice that first week and then start to really ramp it up later on. Again, always dependent on the individual situation. So let's get stuck into all of this. But of course, before we get stuck all into it, just remind you, Indochino is the world's largest made-to-measure menswear brand. Start your style upgrade now with $30 off your total purchase of $399 or more at Indochino.com when entering Locked On at checkout. So let's look at week 1 now in the NBA. As I said, we have got just 6 days on. So it's an interesting split of games. Tuesday, opening night, just the 2 games on. Then we go to 11 on Wednesday, which is real opening night. That's when all the weird shit's going to go down. That podcast after Wednesday's game is going to be a monster. 3 games on Thursday, 9 on Friday, 10 on Saturday, and then we end the week with 5 on Sunday. So eyeballing that, your key stream type of days are Tuesday, obviously, with only 2 games, Thursday with 3, and Sunday with 5. And again, if you're a new person listening to this podcast or watching this show, on a day where there's 11 games on, you can go and add that guy off the waiver wire. He's just not going to get into your active spots. You've got 10 active spots and 3 bench positions in most leagues. So adding someone on an 11-game day, on a 9-game day, 9's a borderline one, on a 10-game day, you can add them and they'll be your 12th best player and they'll sit on your bench. So it's a waste of an ad, it's a waste of a stream. So we really want to be looking at guys that we can add on Tuesday, guys that we can add on Thursday, maybe Friday, and then more importantly, Sunday, and getting multiple ads in. So you add a guy on Tuesday, there's one team that plays the Tuesday and the Thursday, you can add them on Tuesday, get that game Tuesday. Well, whoever you add on Wednesday, it wouldn't work anyway because you've got a full roster, and then you get a second game for the price of one addition on Thursday. So that's one of those strategies that we do often look at, and that's by really balancing the quality games situation. If you don't know what a quality game is, it's a game in where there are fewer NBA games on that day, meaning that the players that are playing are more likely to fit into your active slots. I like to set it, if your league has 10 active spots and 3 bench spots, over on Basketball Monster, I set my quality games threshold at 8. So 8 or fewer means you're generally going to be able to put that guy into your active lineup. 9 or more, it's unlikely. So that means we've got 3 of those days this week with Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. So the teams that have 2 quality games, we've got the Clippers, you've got the Lakers, and the Golden State Warriors. They all have two quality games. The Lakers and the Clippers play each other on opening night. And then the only team with that Tuesday, Thursday, pseudo back-to-back, as I like to call it, are the Clippers. So you can add a Clippers player before Tuesday's game, and there's lots of them available because we know that Paul George is out, and now Scooter Magruder is dealing with an ankle injury. He might not be ready to go. So the value rises for a bunch of guys. Landry Shamet, Ivica Zubac, JaMychal Green, Flaming Mo Harkless. In a deeper league, maybe even Jerome Robinson gets in if Magruder happens to be out. And getting those guys, you can add them on Tuesday. They play Tuesday and they play on Thursday, and you can use them on both of those days. The other teams, the Lakers play Tuesday, but then their next quality game is on Sunday. So while you can add them on the Tuesday, it's Danny Green, it's Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Avery Bradley, Rajon Rondo. Deeper leagues look at Jared Dudley, especially because Kyle Kuzma has been ruled out for the opener, and I think that Kuzma's going to miss the entirety of this week, still not taking contact, so it seems unlikely he'll play at all this week. But you add those guys for the Tuesday, it's unlikely you're going to hold that guy. You're not going to hold Avery Bradley. You're not going to hold Alex Caruso, who's also questionable himself, on your bench for the hopes of using them on Sunday. And the other team is the Warriors. Now, they don't play on opening night, but they do play on the Thursday and they do play on the Sunday. So it's not quite a pseudo back-to-back, but if you've got a full roster on Friday, if you've got a full roster on Saturday, adding a Warriors player for Thursday, and then you get that second bump for Sunday. But again, this week, if you've got those acquisition limits, because there's only 3 quality game days, you don't have to be as focused on getting pseudo back-to-backs in, because if you've got, say, 4 adds that you can do for the week, then you can add someone Tuesday, you can add a different guy Thursday, you can add a different guy Sunday, and that's only 3 adds. Taking into consideration as well that you want to take grabs on guys who are going to have long-term value, especially in these first couple of weeks, without focusing entirely on streaming. Again, happy to sacrifice 1 week's worth of victories to build my team up into something strong as the season begins. So I mentioned there, if you are looking to stream this week, you want to start by streaming those Clippers guys, a bunch of those players. I imagine that Kawhi will play in both of these games. The other guys, Patrick Beverley might be on your waiver wire, Mo Harkless, JaMychal Green, Ivica Zubats, Landry Shamet. These guys are going to be on your wire. Terrence Mann for those deeper leagues, really strong to start there. And then you've got the Golden State Warriors, another team that you can stream by adding them on that Thursday and the Sunday as well. And then you can look at the other team to stream towards the end of the week, dependent on how your team looks. But the Miami Heat are the only team that have a back-to-back on Saturday and Sunday. Now, Saturday there are 10 games on. There are 5 on Sunday. In most cases, on that Saturday, you will have a full roster, so you won't be able to get anyone in to actually play them. But if you were in a situation where there is an opening there on the back end of your roster on that Saturday, adding a Heat player, it's the only team that play that back-to-back on the Saturday, Sunday. This week, the majority of teams play 3 games. There are a handful that play 2. The Magic, the Spurs, the Rockets, the Warriors, the Nuggets, the Pacers, the Bucks, the Cavs, the Sixers, and the Atlanta Hawks. They are your teams that are playing 2 games this week, and teams like the Sixers, the Cavs, the Pacers, the Nuggets, the Spurs, and the Magic, none of their games come on low volume days. So even streaming those players in, you might not be able to use any of those guys who you have on your roster for this week at all. It even gets worse for some of those teams with 3 games. The Utah Jazz, the Phoenix Suns, the Washington Wizards, the Bulls, the Celtics, the Kings, and the Knicks. They all play 3 games this week, but they all play on high volume days. So any of your fringe type players in those situations, if it's the Bulls and you've got Thad Young, he might not actually play 1 single game for you this week, despite them having 3 games for the week. For the Jazz, maybe it's Bojan Bogdanovic, who has had a really rough preseason. They play 3 games, all on those high-volume days, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday. You might not get a single day of action. But in that case, you're not using Bogdanovic, but I'm not dropping him just because I'm not playing that to eke out 1 extra win this week by streaming. That's the sort of move I mean, that don't sell yourself out just for 1 week's worth of action for this coming week. The other guys I think we need to be looking at whose roster percentage is pretty low for this upcoming week, who has value long-term as well as this week. PJ Washington, I think he's going to be probably a top 100 guy this week. I imagine he starts for the Hornets. They played 3 games. He's rostered in 13% of Yahoo leagues. So he is a guy that you should be adding not only for the long term, but for this week as well. And I did mention Yahoo. I do have to mention that Yahoo is the place that you should be going. If you haven't started up a fantasy league, go over to Yahoo and start a new fantasy league. You can check my link in the description on the show notes, on the audio and on the video version of this show. If you click that link, it helps the Yahoo guys know that you came from listening to this podcast. But if you go and start a league over on Yahoo, they have got the best fantasy app in the business. Ease of setting your lineup. All you got to do is click that button, start active players, and it will adjust your lineup for you through the whole week. Now, it's always a good idea to go back and look over just to make sure. But the app has everything you need at your fingertips. Ease of trades, ease of setting lineups, ease of making adds and drops. The system on Yahoo, they've changed a few things this season as well, making it easier for you to start your playoffs early. I still wish they had a little bit more flexibility there, but it's still the number 1 place to go and play your fantasy basketball leagues for this season. So go and click my link in the show notes and in the description audio-wise and in the video as well. You can go and click that link and sign up for a new Yahoo Fantasy Basketball League right now. All right, so yeah, PJ Washington, a great option to add this week. Rostered in under 20% of Yahoo leagues. Storm and Norman Powell as well is sitting at 15% over on Yahoo. The Raptors have 3 games this week. One of those is a quality game. It's opening night, so a great way to start off the week by having Norm Powell there. I think he's probably going to have borderline value anyway. But for this week, he is absolutely a guy that we need to have a look at. There's a bunch of Clippers, as I mentioned, Flaming Mo Harkless, Ivica Zubats, JaMychal Green, Landry Shamet. All those guys, especially for those first 2 days this week, are really important ads to have a look at. There is also another guy for the Hornets who is important to take a squiz at this week, and that is the Baconator, Dwayne Bacon. 3 games for the Hornets. Now, still, they only have 1 quality game, so maybe you only get 1 game's worth of action out of Bacon. But someone like Washington, for example, I think that even though he's only got 1 quality game, you'll be able to start him all 3 games this week. Again, I think he can be in that top 120 type range. And if a player's a top 120 guy, in general, you'll be able to start them most nights. Irrespective of schedule, because they'll be in your best 10 guys rather than your 11th or 12th guy. So make sure you've got an option to go and add someone like that. Other players who I think are quite under-rostered at the moment, Jay Crowder, Alfred Payton, who I do believe is going to be the starter for the Knicks because Fizdale, of course, Tyus Jones, Malik Monk, these guys have got 3 games this week. But even going back on this, like someone like Alfred and Ish Smith, they both play 3 games this week. But they play 3 games with just 0 quality games. So you could add them, but will they actually be in your best 10 guys? And will you be able to add them onto your roster? Their upside, I think, is pretty low, especially Ish, considering I think Isaiah Thomas might actually be back this week. Now, Thomas is not going to play in the opener, or in all likelihood, but that does reduce Smith's upside. So you could add them and look at their 3 games, but will you actually play them at all this week? In a weekly lock league, it might be a little bit different. There's someone like Marcus Morris, for example. While I don't love his upside, the Knicks play 3 games. They have a no quality game, so on a streaming basis, he might not be useful. But in a weekly lock league, because he's got that volume of games, Marcus Morris, you could probably lock into your weekly lineup. I think he's going to start almost assuredly over Kevin Knox this season. So there is differences between daily leagues and weekly lock leagues. A guy like Morris has more value in a weekly lock league where he has the 3 games and you lock him in and get those 3 versus a daily changes league where you might look at him and on those 3 days that the Knicks play, maybe he's your 11th best guy and you get 0 games out of him. But in a weekly lock situation, his 3 games is going to be better than someone else's 2 games. Like, for example, DeMar DeRozan only plays 2 games this week. Maybe Marcus Morris's 3 games is better than DeMar's 2. You get an extra 50% worth of games. Maybe it's better than Jamal Murray's 2. Maybe it's better than Tobias Harris's 2. Maybe it's definitely better than a Gary Harris 2 or a DeJounte Murray 2 or a Kevon Looney 2. Like these are, Evan Fournier, these sort of players, like adding a Marcus Morris off the waiver wire and locking him into a weekly lineup with 3 games is better than 2 games of those guys. But in a daily changes league, if I had to choose between Harris and Marcus Morris for one day, which one of those slot into my daily lineup that day, then Harris is the guy, then Murray is the guy, then Tobias Harris is the guy. They're the guys that I put in. So it is quite a difference, and it's why it's super important that you understand what your league settings are, how you have to run your league, because those decisions are quite different depending on how the league is set up. So make sure you are looking at that. As for other news we need to look at, I did talk about Kyle Kuzma. I think he's going to be out for the entirety of this week. Isaiah Thomas will miss the opener for the Wizards, so that means Ish gets decent minutes in that first one, then that probably drops down. It looks like Kevon Looney will be back as the starter for the Warriors on opening night, so your Marquise Chris fantasies are probably going to be dashed. Looney shouldn't be on the waiver wire anywhere. Russell Westbrook will be fine for the Rockets, it looks like. JJ Redick is most likely going to start for Zion Williamson. I still am hearing reports of a torn meniscus for Zion. Nothing has been officially reported, but I am still hearing that that's a possibility. So he could be a month, 6 weeks, 2 months out of action. Don't panic. It's nothing official at this point, but it's obviously not great news. We haven't heard anything, but Zion will be out of the opener. Redick to start there. Derek Favors will be ready after he sat out the last preseason game as well. We're still waiting on some roster decisions to be made at the time of me recording this. It looks like Christian Wood will make the Pistons roster, and that's not a surprise. Whether Kyrie Thomas or Joe Johnson gets waived remains to be seen. I don't know why they would keep Johnson around. He's not providing any positive impact for this team, and he's as old as me, so there's obviously no upside in having someone like that on the squad. With a guy like Gerald Green out for the season, you look at someone like Chris Clemens, who has some value early on in very deep leagues for the Rockets. He might be in that sort of a role, or at least getting some minutes early on, especially with Austin Rivers a little bit banged up, although it does look like Rivers is going to play in the opener with that neck problem that he sustained. Other sort of injury news or rotation type news, DeAndre Hunter's going to be starting at small forward for the Hawks. Not a surprise there. The other interesting thing that came out out of nowhere is that the Bulls said that they're going to be limiting Otto Porter to 30 minutes a night and have some sort of plan for back-to-backs, which seems crazy to me, considering, A, they don't have any other small forwards unless you consider Chandler Hutchison a good player, which you shouldn't, or Denzel the Hammer Valentine is a good player, which, again, you shouldn't. So if they're going to limit Porter's numbers... Now, me and Matt, we talked about this on this podcast quite a bit about Otto Porter, about how saying if his projections came out and he was 35th or 38th or whatever it was, that he wouldn't be the guy that we'd want to take in that area because his value is really inflated by those steals, which do become more prevalent later on in the draft. So he's more of a fifth-round guy. Losing those minutes takes that value away from him anyway. I still think that given the Bulls' lack of depth at small forward, if Porter is fine, he won't be playing just 30 minutes a night. It'll be 33 or push up to 34. But what it does do, if Porter does get limited in these minutes, it means they'll have to play Tomas Satoransky at small forward more often, which opens up more minutes in that backcourt for someone like Kobe White, who's put up a ton of points in preseason. Now, White does nothing else, but he can be an interesting Andrew Wiggins type guy. And before everyone gets super hyped about Kobe White, and his shooting's been great, the same people who get super hyped, man, do I add Kobe White? They would absolutely shit on Andrew Wiggins for being a 20-point-per-game guy with 3 rebounds and 1 assist. Yet Kobe White will score 20 with 1 assist and 0 rebounds, and everyone wants to go the old Danish backhand on him. Now, I understand shitting on Andrew Wiggins. There's been issues with consistency and lack of effort and efficiency and all that sort of stuff. But if we're going to be critical of Wiggins for being an empty 20-point-per-game guy, we can't get all hard and hot and bothered over Kobe White doing the exact same thing, especially when White has a limited path to minutes versus what Wiggins can do. Now, that's not to say that you can't stream White in or this doesn't open up more minutes, because I think it does, because it pushes Satoransky over to the 3 more, opening up more of those minutes for Archer Jacquino, for Chris Dunn, and for Kobe White. But we do have to really, there are inherent biases. I have biases, I'm sure, when I'm talking. But we have to realize these things when we look at it from or try and look at it as an objective point of view when assessing these players and their overall fantasy value. It does look like that Cam Reddish and the Thunderpants Kevin Huerter are going to be ready for opening night, so that's good news. Reddish will be limited to around 20 minutes, which is about what he'd play. I think that pushes up probably as the season continues. Alex Caruso dealing with a pelvic bone issue as well. He should be ready to go. If he is out for opener, it boosts Rondo's value. It boosts Quinn Cook as well, who should jump into the rotation there in that backcourt. I think that's probably all the major news that we need to talk about for week 1 coming up. Tomorrow, I'm going to be previewing the first 2 games of the season, talking about the DFS value for the Pelicans and the Raptors and the Clippers and the Lakers. And then on Wednesday's show, we are straight into it. Our standard season type format where we look at the games from the day that just occurred and then preview the next day's games as well. So we're going to get stuck into that as well. Going to be trying the pre-game lock show this season, which I'll be doing for the Patreons at patreon.com/redrock_bball, talking about late breaking news before the game's tip to help you get your DFS and your streaming situation settled for that day. So make sure you are a good bloke over on Patreon at patreon.com, again, /redrock_bball. That'll wrap it up for today's show. Don't forget, go and sign up for a Yahoo League. The link is in the description. It is in the description on audio and on video. Go and sign up there. Follow me on Twitter at redrock_bball, Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Check out Locked On NBA as well. All of our individual team preview shows or team pods over there, plus the big NBA preview on Locked On NBA. Lots of great stuff happening over there. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Andre Drummond.